By the time they started breaking the kitchen floor, the smell was no longer something Michael could explain away. At first, he had tried. Old house, old pipes, maybe a dead animal somewhere in the walls. Something ordinary, something that could be fixed with bleach and a plumber. But the odor that rose from the kitchen in the summer of 2020 didn't behave like something ordinary. It didn't come and go with the wind. It thickened, it settled, it clung. On that morning, the workers had already stripped the cabinets and were starting on the tiles. Sunlight came through the barred window above the sink and fell across the patterned floor as Mother had chosen years ago. If he let his eyes blur, he could still see her there. Hair pinned back, bare feet on cool tiles, humming while she scrubbed. A hammer struck ceramic. The crack split the memory in half. Michael stood in the doorway, arms folded, pretending that he was only there to supervise the renovation. But his gaze kept drifting to the stained patch of floor near the center of the kitchen. The smell was thickest there. Even with a mask on, he could taste it. "Sir," one of the men called to him. "There's something weird under this part. It's hollow." Michael forced himself closer. The tiles were broken and stacked aside, exposing a rough layer of concrete underneath. One worker crouched, knuckles tapping along the surface, listening to the echo. "How hollow?" Michael asked. The man shifted his weight, knocked again, then looked up with a small frown. "Like, there's space under. Or a tank, maybe. You said the septic is out back, right?" "It is," Michael said automatically. "Or, that's what my mother told us." He realized too late how that sounded. The workers went quiet for a moment, the way people do when something uninvited walks through a room. Then they went back to work, the hammer rising and falling in measured blows. With each strike, the smell grew worse. When the first section of concrete gave way, the worker swore under his breath and jerked back, one hand covering his nose. A wave of odor rose out of the opening, thick, sour, sweet at the same time. Michael's stomach lurched. It was not the smell of dirt or sewage or mold. It was something else, something his body recognized without naming. "God," the man muttered. "Something died under there." Michael swallowed hard. "What do you see?" The worker angled his phone's flashlight and leaned in, squinting. "Just more concrete. And something stuck in it. Plastic? Wait, hold on." He slid gloved fingers into the gap, feeling around, and tugged. A dirty, rectangular shape came free with a sick, tearing sound. It was wrapped tightly in a clear plastic sleeve, edges rough from being set in cement. The worker wiped it with his thumb. A laminated card stared back at them. Even through the grime, Michael recognized her face. The same formal photograph used for every document. The same small, careful smile. The name under it was smudged but legible. Maria Evelyn Sayos. For a long second, nothing in the kitchen moved. Dust hung in the light. The worker's breathing sounded too loud. Michael felt something rise in him. Shock, yes, but also something darker. The sick thud of recognition catching up with a dread he'd been outrunning for years. "Sir," another worker said, his voice subdued now. "There's more in here." He reached back into the opening and pulled out a second item. A worn passport, edges sealed in the same rough concrete. Then a third, an ATM card, also encased and hidden in the slab beneath the kitchen. Michael stared at the items in the worker's hands. His mother's ID, her passport, her card, all the things you need if you're leaving. All the things you take with you when you go abroad. He felt the room tilt. Someone said his name. One of the workers touched his arm, asking if he wanted to stop the work for the day. Michael heard himself say yes. He told them to leave the hole as it was, to cover it with boards and tape it off. He paid them and watched them go, then locked the gate and sat alone at the kitchen table, the smell still leaking up through the floor. He knew as he stared at the covered opening that there was only one thing left to do. Tomorrow he would have to call the police. But the dread that kept him awake that night didn't begin in that kitchen. It had started 4 years earlier, on the day his mother disappeared, and somehow stayed visible at the same time. In 2016, the Sayos house had felt crowded. The 2-story home in Das Marinas had never been large, but Evelyn had a way of filling it, not with things, but with presence. Her slippers moved between rooms before dawn, the smell of garlic hit the air before the sun did, and the sound of her voice, soft when she was in a good mood, sharp when she wasn't, stitched the day together. She was in her mid-50s then, but she carried herself with the restless energy of someone who'd never had time to be tired. Her children, Michael and Joanna, had grown up under that gaze, loved, supervised, occasionally scolded into a better version of themselves. At least that was how Evelyn saw it. Joanna had not always agreed. As Joanna moved through her teens, the arguments in the house started to follow a pattern, one that Michael learned to listen for from his room. The low murmur of Evelyn's voice, then a rising edge. Joanna's replies, brittle and defensive. The word responsibility coming up again and again. When Joanna became pregnant at 16 and moved in with her boyfriend, Ronald Rudy James, the arguments didn't stop. They just changed location. Instead of being about homework and curfews, they were about feeding schedules, bills, diapers, time spent outside. Evelyn's visits to the young couple's place often ended with slammed doors and raised voices, but she kept going. She brought food. She brought medicine. She brought advice that landed like accusation. "Your mother cares too much," Michael had once told his sister, trying to mediate. "That's the problem. She just doesn't know how to say it nicely." Joanna had shot him a look that was more tired than angry. You don't have to live with her in your head all the time. By August of 2016, the atmosphere in the house had changed. Evelyn had allowed Joanna and Rudy to move back in temporarily, for the sake of the child, as she put it. She told neighbors that she wanted to keep an eye on her daughter, that she wanted to help. She never mentioned that the arguments had now moved under her own roof, echoing down her own staircase. Then, suddenly, she was gone. According to Joanna, it happened in a single, volatile afternoon. She told the story later in a practiced tone. How Evelyn had reached some invisible limit. How she had stormed out of the house in frustration after yet another argument. How she had announced, in that last heated moment, that she was done with their drama and going to Singapore. To anyone who heard it, the story sounded improbable, but not impossible. People left for work abroad all the time. People reached breaking points. People said things in anger and then did them. Joanna told her brother that their mother had a house in Singapore, a place of her own where she could clear her head. She said Evelyn needed space, time alone, distance from the constant conflict. She added details as if she were padding a thin mattress, casual mentions of a quiet neighborhood, of strict rules in the estate, of limited visitors. "She's okay, Kuya," she'd said. "She just needs time." If that had been all, maybe the family would have accepted the story more fully. But Evelyn did not vanish completely. In the weeks after her departure, she continued to exist in another way. Her Facebook account stayed active. At first, it was reassuring. The blue circle would appear next to her name in the chat list. A message would come through. Brief greetings, forwarded inspirational quotes, a line or two asking after the children. She posted on Joanna's birthday, an affectionate greeting, the kind she might have written from another room. She reacted to photos, left short comments. The problem was not what she said. It was everything she didn't. Michael noticed it first. Whenever someone tried to suggest a video call, the conversation shifted abruptly. The connection was always bad, or she was busy, or her battery was low. She never sent new photos of herself. When relatives asked what she was doing in Singapore, her answers were vague. Just at home, resting. It's okay here. Nothing about her job, nothing about co-workers, nothing about the city itself. It was as if someone had taken his mother and flattened her into a set of gestures. "Have you talked to her voice?" an aunt asked one day. "Not just chat?" Michael hesitated. "Not really. Joanna says she calls sometimes." Joanna backed that up. She claimed that whenever Evelyn called the house, she wanted to speak only to her daughter, that she was still too angry with everyone else. When relatives asked to be put on the line, there was always some technical complication. For a while, people accepted it. It was easier to believe in a distant, temperamental Evelyn than in something darker. The chat bubbles kept appearing. The profile picture stayed the same. Life, as it does, moved on, slowly, then more quickly than anyone expected. Still, small doubts collected in quiet corners. Michael remembered standing once in his mother's old bedroom, looking at the dresser where she used to keep her documents. The drawer where her passport should have been was not empty. It was still there, tucked into its sleeve. He told himself it must be an older one, replaced before her trip. It was the kind of excuse that came too easily. He did not tell the police anything then because he did not call them. Not yet. Years went by like that. Joanna raised her child. The household routines changed. The house itself began to deteriorate. The roof leaked. The paint cracked. Small repairs were postponed. Evelyn's Facebook account continued to send out small, digital proofs of life. "Happy birthday," she would write, sometimes to multiple people on the same day, the wording oddly similar. "God bless you." Every time, the recipients felt a small flicker of relief. She's still there. She remembers. Then two things happened that shifted that fragile balance. The first was internal. Michael's unease hardened into something he could no longer reason away. The second was external. The date on the calendar. On September 7th, 2018, 2 years after the supposed trip to Singapore, Michael walked into a police station and reported his mother missing. By then, the story felt thin coming out of his mouth. A 54-year-old woman, no known mental health issues, leaving without proper documentation, staying abroad for 2 years but never initiating a single real-time, face-to-face contact with her children. A daughter who controlled most of the communication. A passport that might or might not be unused. A set of messages that didn't sound quite right. The officer filed the report, but his expression remained non-committal. Adults, he explained, had the right to disappear if they wanted to leave their families, to start over. Maybe she'd run away from the stress. Maybe she didn't want to be found. No immediate action was taken. The case was noted, stored among others, waiting for something concrete. Footage, records, witnesses, something more than a son's unease. Life retreated back into its uneasy rhythm. Joanna continued to insist that their mother was fine, that she checked in privately. The messages from Evelyn's profile continued, sometimes aligning conveniently with events in the family, as if someone was tracking their timelines very closely. The house, however, continued to age in a way that could not be ignored. By mid-2020, the kitchen was becoming practically unusable. Tiles were loose, pipes were leaking. Michael decided it was time to invest in serious repairs. He did not know, when he called the workers and scheduled the renovation, that he was also scheduling the collapse of the story his family had been living in. That night, after the discovery of the documents in the concrete slab, Michael barely slept. He sat on the same chair his mother used to occupy during long phone calls and watched the boards covering the hole in the floor. The smell seeped into the wood, into the walls, into the air he tried to breathe slowly. The ID, the passport, the card, they were on the table in front of him, laid out in a line, objects that should have been in a purse, in a suitcase, in an airport checkpoint, not buried in cement beneath the kitchen. He thought of the Facebook messages, the birthday greetings, the way Joanna had insisted that their mother just needed space. He thought of the unanswered questions he had pushed aside, because it was easier to accept the version of reality everyone else seemed comfortable with. By dawn, the decision was no longer a decision. It was the only path left. He called the police. The officers who arrived that morning had at first the wary politeness of people expecting to find nothing more than an old broken pipe. They nodded, took statements, walked through the house, stood at the edge of the boarded hole. When the boards were removed and the smell hit them full force, their posture changed. Masks went on, gloves were pulled tight. The casual pace of their movements sharpened. They cordoned off the kitchen, called for more personnel, and began to widen the opening in the floor. The digging took hours. Concrete gave way in chunks, revealing the outline of a structure beneath, rectangular, unfinished, and sealed in a way that looked both rushed and deliberate. It was a septic tank, but one that had never been properly connected, one that seemed to exist primarily as a concealed cavity. When they finally cracked through its upper layer, the smell that burst out was almost physical. One officer staggered back, face tightening under his mask. Another turned away entirely, shoulders hunched for a moment in an involuntary reaction. From the edge of the doorway, Michael watched as they pointed their lights down into the darkness. There was a shape inside, a tangle of limbs curled into a position that no living body could sustain, skin and fabric reduced to a single, indistinct mass. The face was no longer a face. Someone said quietly, "Human remains." The words hung in the air like a sentence pushed through a tight throat. Michael clutched the edge of the doorframe until his fingers hurt. He did not collapse or cry or shout. Instead, a strange cold clarity moved through him. The story of Singapore, of the distant house abroad, of messages typed on a phone thousands of miles away. That story had just been replaced by something that fit the facts better, however much he wished it did not. They did not ask him to identify the body. No one could, not in that state. The remains were carefully lifted, sealed, and transported away. Michael watched the van leave from the front gate, feeling as if the house itself had been exposed. Not just physically, but morally, as if its foundations had been caught in a lie. The police promised to update him after the autopsy. He told himself that nothing was certain yet, that there were still procedures, tests, protocols, that until those were complete, there was still room, however small, for some other explanation. But when the call finally came from the regional crime laboratory, uncertainty was not part of the conversation. The report was clinical, detached. It had to be. The remains from the septic tank belonged to an adult female. The cause of death was consistent with sharp and blunt force trauma. There was a fatal wound to the neck, multiple stab injuries to the chest, defensive wounds on the right forearm, and a severe head injury consistent with a heavy blow. In simpler terms, someone had struck the victim hard enough to fracture the skull, then stabbed her repeatedly. DNA testing removed the last remaining doubt. The body in the tank was Maria Evelyn Sayos. Michael listened to the officer's voice relay the findings, each sentence pushing against the fragile version of reality he had been holding. The words homicide and multiple wounds and confirmed match stacked themselves neatly, mercilessly. His mother had not moved to another country. She had not been living quietly abroad, watching their lives through a screen. She had died here, in this house, and had been left under their feet while her digital shadow impersonated her. Once the lab results came in, the investigation changed shape. The question was no longer if something had happened to Evelyn. The question became who had done it and how they had managed to keep it hidden for 4 years. The circle of suspicion was not large. From the very beginning, only a handful of people had been closely linked to Evelyn's disappearance and the strange maintenance of her presence afterward. Among them, 2 stood out, the same ones who had insisted consistently and confidently that she was in Singapore and wished to be left alone. Her daughter, Joanna, and Joanna's boyfriend, Rudy. The police began to pull at the loose threads. Neighbors remembered certain things now that they had context. They recalled the foul smell that had drifted from the property years before, how it would grow worse and then suddenly lessen, as if someone had done something to contain it. They remembered seeing Rudy repeatedly mixing cement, carrying bags of gravel and sand, working at the area near what was now known to be the septic tank entrance. Suppliers confirmed purchases of building materials not long after Evelyn's disappearance. Phone records, financial patterns, small inconsistencies in timelines, all the small details that had once seemed random now formed a rough outline of intent. Meanwhile, the digital evidence told its own story. The activity log of Evelyn's social media account showed consistent logins from the same local area, not from overseas. Patterns in the language of messages suggested a different hand at the keyboard. As the pieces closed in around them, Joanna and Rudy were brought in for questioning. On July 23, 2020, they sat in an interrogation room, 2 plastic chairs, 1 table, walls painted a color, meant to be calming and failing at it. Outside, case files and calls waited. Inside, time stretched. The first round of questioning was firm but procedural. Their account of events, their recollection of Evelyn's departure, their justification for the years-long pretense. Every answer they gave had to lean hard on the story they had already told the family. She left on her own. She was angry. She wanted distance. She asked us to keep everyone away. But now, unlike before, the investigators had a body. They also had something else. Time. 4 years of it, layered over the truth like sediment. Under pressure, sediment cracks. The question sharpened. Discrepancies were brought up. Why were Evelyn's documents under the kitchen floor if she had supposedly boarded a flight? Why was her social media activity originating from the same town? At the same hours Joanna was active on her own account? Why did no airline have a record of her departure? Why did no one, no friend, no distant relative ever actually speak to her in real time after August 2016? At some point, the story became impossible to maintain. The room grew quieter. Joanna's replies shortened. Her eyes, which had tried to stay steady, started to flick toward the table, toward the corners, toward nothing at all. Rudy's jaw tightened. He crossed and uncrossed his arms. Sweat gathered at his temple. It was Joanna who broke first. When she finally spoke the words, "I was the one who killed her," they fell into the room like something dropped from a great height. For a second, no one moved. The sentence seemed too stark for the space it occupied. She said it again, as if hearing herself had made it real. From there, the narrative, dark and tangled, began to unspool. According to Joanna and Rudy, there had been no single explosive event that led to the murder. It had been instead a buildup of grievances, arguments over parenting, over money, over time spent outside, over respect. Evelyn's way of expressing concern had grown more insistent, more cutting. Joanna, already carrying years of feeling judged and controlled, took each word like another weight. Each time Evelyn scolded her, Joanna would seek comfort in Rudy's frustration. In those conversations, Evelyn was not a worried mother trying clumsily to guide her daughter. She became an oppressor, an obstacle, a force that had to be resisted. Rudy, for his part, explained his hatred of Evelyn as something that had grown from that steady stream of complaints. In his version, she was always undermining him, always criticizing, always making Joanna feel small. He came to see her not as a future mother-in-law, but as a persistent enemy. Over time, in whispered conversations and shared resentments, a thought emerged. A thought they could have recognized as monstrous if they had stepped outside themselves for a moment. What if she was gone? On the day Evelyn disappeared, the plan was simple in structure and devastating in implication. Joanna called her mother from the bottom of the stairs and told her she had a surprise waiting. Something about the word "in that house" would have sounded ordinary. Families use surprises all the time to soften moments, to distract from old tensions. Evelyn came down the stairs unaware of the shift in the air. At the bottom, Rudy was waiting. He held a hammer. According to their confession, there was a moment, a fraction of time, between Evelyn seeing him and the blow landing. It was long enough for her to register something wrong in his posture, in the way he gripped the tool, not long enough to stop what followed. The first impact dropped her. She made a sound. Joanna described it later, voice breaking, as a kind of gasp, half shout, half breath. Blood spread across the floor in a smear, bright against the familiar tiles. But Evelyn was still alive. Her body struggled, hands moving, trying to push herself up to orient herself. Panic flooded the space where their anger had been. They had passed a point that could not be reversed, and in that realization, something colder took over. Rudy told Joanna to get a knife. She did. He insisted they had to finish it. She complied. What happened next was recorded later in the autopsy and echoed, less clinically, in Joanna's own recounting: multiple stab wounds to the chest, a deep wound to the neck, cuts to the forearm where Evelyn had tried to shield herself. The act was violent, but it was not cinematic. It was clumsy, frantic, carried out in a domestic space full of ordinary objects, plates, chairs, a child's cup on the counter. When it was over, there was a body in the middle of the house and a question they had not truly planned for. What now? The septic tank beneath the house provided an answer. The tank had been constructed but never finished properly. It was a cavity under their feet, sealed but accessible if someone was determined enough. They dragged Evelyn's body down, limbs catching on steps and corners. They lowered her into the dark chamber and let her fall into the foul water waiting there. Then they covered her. Gravel, sand, cement, ordered, delivered, mixed. Rudy sealed the opening, layer by layer, sweating from effort and fear. When the smell began to seep up in the days afterward, he added more cement again and again, trying to trap the decomposition beneath a thicker mask. Neighbors noticed the odor and the repeated construction, but without context, they filed it under odd and moved on. People learned to live with strange things around them. What the cement could not fully seal, however, the internet could. Joanna admitted that she had taken over her mother's social media accounts almost immediately. She began to log in as Evelyn, sending messages to relatives, posting birthday greetings, maintaining the illusion that Evelyn was elsewhere. living a life beyond their reach. She sent herself messages from her mother's profile. She wrote to friends and cousins, typing in a tone that mimicked Evelyn's patterns just closely enough. Any awkwardness in the phrasing was easily dismissed as the way people text when they're distracted. The screen became a stage on which she could perform the version of reality that kept questions away. Every new message bought them more time. Every like, every "God bless you" in the comments, every delayed response that finally appeared with some plausible excuse kept the story afloat. For 4 years, a dead woman continued to move in the digital space her family watched most closely. In the end, the law caught up. With the confession, the physical evidence, the digital footprint, and the forensic findings, the charges were clear. Rudy was charged under Article 248 of the revised penal code for murder. Joanna faced a different charge, parricide, under Article 246, reserved for those who kill a parent or other close relative. It was as if the law itself had a word ready for the betrayal she had committed. They were transferred to detention, held in a secure location. The case entered a different phase, one of motions, hearings, and processes that move at a speed most people outside the system never anticipate. Public reporting on the proceedings thinned out after the initial shock. News articles summarized the discovery, the confession, the charges. They did not follow every hearing. They did not provide a definitive line about sentencing. Officially, the last widely available information was that both remained in custody, awaiting the full weight of the court's decision. For Michael, the absence of clear closure from the justice system became its own kind of residue. Justice was moving, but out of sight. The house had given up its secret, but the full story of what would happen to those responsible for his mother's death stayed obscured behind legal walls and sparse updates. The moral inevitability of what should happen and the practical opacity of what was happening did not fully align. In the months that followed the discovery, the house changed. The septic tank was emptied, cleaned, sealed under official supervision. The kitchen floor was rebuilt, the same footprint, new tiles. The smell that had once defined the space eventually dissipated, leaving behind only the ghost of a memory that Michael could summon at will. He started spending less time there. On the days he did come by, handling paperwork or sorting through his mother's belongings, he moved more slowly. He found himself lingering at the places where she had left small traces, a grocery list tucked into a book, a handwritten note reminding herself of a bill due date, a recipe clipped from an old magazine. Each fragment reminded him that behind the clinical term victim had been a real person who had cooked and worried and nagged and laughed. He also found, among her things, an old notebook where she had scribbled plans for minor renovations, ideas about repainting the kitchen, fixing the roof, maybe someday upgrading the tiles she had chosen when money was tight. It struck him, with a kind of dull force, that the renovation she had never gotten around to had finally happened, but only because of her absence, because of what the house had been forced to reveal. Outside the home, time moved on. New cases appeared in the news. Other stories of violence and deception took their place in the public imagination. The Sayos case remained, for most people, a story they had once heard, then partially forgotten, an unsettling headline filed away in the archive of things that happened to other families. For the people who had loved Evelyn, forgetting was not an option. Some evenings, when the air was still and the hum of the neighborhood dipped, Michael would find himself opening his phone and scrolling to his mother's name. Her profile still existed. Her last post written by Joanna's hand and voice, stood frozen in time. He could have reported the account, asked for it to be memorialized or deleted. Part of him wanted to. Another part held back. There was something brutally symbolic about it. The way a person could be gone in every physical sense, and yet remain digitally, superficially, active beyond their own death. The way a lie could live on in pixels long after its origin had been exposed. He would catch himself staring at the last seen time, even knowing it meant nothing now. A remnant of the years when his brain had used that small indicator to anchor its hope. Sometimes he would imagine the 4-year gap, his mother's body in the tank beneath the kitchen, dissolving into something unrecognizable, while her digital echo continued to wish people happy birthday and press little blue thumbs-up signs into their feeds. Reality above, buried truth below. A house held between them. The law would do what the law could. It would assign labels, impose terms, define the crime in numbered articles, but no sentence, no matter how long, would fully translate the fact that somewhere a mother had opened her home to her daughter, and that in that same home, the daughter had decided to erase her. The case became part of a larger, more unsettling thought, that the most horrific betrayals rarely arrive as masked intruders or cinematic stalkers. They come from familiar hands, in familiar rooms, with arguments everyone has heard some version of. Control, respect, freedom, responsibility. Words that can build a family or break one apart. Evelyn Sayos had believed, perhaps naively, that love plus discipline would be enough to guide her children through the hardest parts of their lives. She had been wrong about that, but wrongness, even when it is sharp and intrusive and clumsy, does not justify what was done to her. Her story ended in a septic tank. The story her killers told in the years afterward ended in an online status update. Somewhere between those two versions, the truth rose to the surface and refused to sink again. This was Midnight Horror Society. Dark curiosity for sleep. Until your next midnight session, sleep well.